starting from scratch. In this talk, Ben will discuss the challenges presented when migrating an existing web service to a scalable cloud environment and some of the unexpected differences between running your own service and hosting it in a public data center.
So, hi everyone. So just a little bit of background on the presentation. This is based off of a talk I gave to my team last week when we were discussing, because my group is the first group in the team to move to the public cloud. So if there is anything I am saying that you're unable to follow, please let me know and I will explain it further. So as Megan mentioned, I am a member of the class of 2012. I graduated with a BS in computer science, and I started working at Microsoft in July. I'm on the Windows Live Safety Platform team, which is responsible for making sure people don't do stupid things on the internet. So in this team, we are responsible for the parental controls, which is what I'm going to be talking about now. The spam filter that is used by all of Microsoft's services, so that would be Messenger, Skype, Exchange, Outlook, and Hotmail. We are responsible for the anti-abuse team, which searches for account detection, or hacking detection, to try and identify compromised accounts or spam accounts and suspend them, as well as the application reputation team, which is responsible for stopping you from downloading and running viruses willingly, because people do that. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about our attempts to move family safety to the cloud. It started out as part of Windows Live OneCare, which is a paid-for antivirus service that didn't work so well. So it had a few users, but not very many. Then it was moved to Windows Essentials, which is a free set of downloads. But still, it was sort of buried on Microsoft's website, and it had a few users, like tens of thousands, but not that many. As of yesterday, it's built into Windows. So we're probably going to get a few more users soon. The team itself is not that big. We have 4 program managers, 5 developers, and 7 test engineers. And we are responsible for the full stack going from the driver to the web services. The 2 web services we have are the settings service that actually gets checked to see if something's permitted, and a service that generates reports for the parents on what their kids have been up to. We send out weekly emails. We have a website where they can see the reports as well as change the settings. Basically, we have a lot of stuff and not a lot of people. So we didn't have time to move everything to the cloud. We just moved the reporting service that takes the reports from the clients and filters out things like AJAX calls, because parents don't want to see a million calls to double-click on the kids' activities list. And we moved the email service. So we used Azure, which is kind of obvious because Microsoft doesn't like us using Amazon services when they have one that works just as well. Azure is a platform as a service. It is different than EC2, which is infrastructure as a service. There are 3 different levels of cloud services. Software as a service, which is a pre-built application, such as the Google Apps or WordPress. Infrastructure as a service, which is where they just hand you a VM and say, here, go. And then the middle layer, platform as a service, where you're still running your own code, but you have a framework supporting you that handles things like monitoring for frozen programs and doing load balancing for you. And that is where Azure lies. Now, the services are not quite as split up so cleanly as this. For example, EC2 does have an add-on called Elastic Beanstalk that lets it act as a platform, and Azure has VM roles that lets it act as infrastructure. But for the most part, it's set up like this. So why are we using Azure? For one thing, you push a button, get another instance. It makes it really easy to scale. Microsoft has a lot of infrastructure, but adding more of it is not that easy. It takes about 3 months between when you requisition more hardware and when it actually gets installed. So if we were to get more traffic than we wanted, we would have trouble scaling up if we didn't use this. We have, as I mentioned, the built-in monitoring and load balancing, which takes some of the burden off of us. And since we're already using Microsoft's development tools, it mostly works great with them. It does have a few disadvantages. The biggest one we found is that the cloud services are optimized for a specific type of service. More of for generating a website that is going to be mostly reads as opposed to mostly writes. And when you try to move outside that model, for example, having an email service that sends like 1 million emails once a week, it doesn't set up so well. So that's just some background about where we're coming from. So the first thing we had to do when we decided to move to the cloud is that we needed to set up the structure for our program. Azure supports 4 types of data. Blobs, which is arbitrary data sitting in containers. You can think of it sort of like a MS-DOS file system where you're only allowed to have one level of folders. Queues, which are sort of first in, first out, but not really. They actually aren't guaranteed to be first in, first out. There's just a correlation between when you put it in and when you take it out. Tables, which is simply non-relational set of data, distributed, partitioned, but you just have a set of data that you can query. And then there's SQL Azure, which is the full SQL service. This part took, figuring out how to set up the data took a long time because data does not parallelize that easy, especially for writes. So when you're not in the cloud, you're typically using a relational database. For those of you who have taken databases, you probably remember the ACID guarantees, atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Each transaction is guaranteed to happen at once. So if a second process tries reading while something else is writing, it will either see the old state or it will see the new state. It won't get caught in the middle. The same set of commands will execute in the same way every single time. You won't end up with race conditions, and the database will never be left in an inconsistent state. When you're using non-relational databases, which is what, for example, the tables in Azure are, you don't have those guarantees. You can scale out easier because you don't have to do as many locks. You can just stick data on more servers and have a directory server direct you to the right one. And there's no transaction support. Each attribute that you're updating gets updated one at a time. So you can run into hitting inconsistent states. What we ended up doing to solve this was not incredibly elegant. So you have to worry about 3 different problems. Dealing with bad data where the input that you're getting is malformed. Dealing with bad programs where your program is just buggy. And since we're not moving everything to Azure, we still have external calls, and those can fail for no reason at all. So what we ended up setting up was using blobs because queues weren't fast enough, using the metadata on the blobs to set the least time and the number of attempts. No other process would attempt to grab it for a couple minutes after it was last leased, and then after X number of attempts, it gets garbage collected. For the email service, we ended up making a status table and updating the status as we sent out each email. It actually took us several weeks of development time to come out with this, even though we already had a working system when it was running locally. So we got to the, so we wrote the program. It only took a couple weeks, and then we went to go test it. So does anybody actually know how much performance you get in a VM on Azure or EC2? It's about as much as your average netbook. A small VM is 1.6 gigahertz single core with 1.75 gigabytes of RAM. Amazon was a little bit more specific. Theirs is pegged to a 1.7 gigahertz early 2006 processor, which I checked. This is a picture of a new netbook. I just grabbed it off of Acer's website. Using the Passmark score, the netbook does win. So I built myself a new desktop a couple months ago, and I decided to check against that. My desktop is about as powerful as 3 extra large instances. So whatever performance you're getting running locally, it's going to be a whole lot worse in the cloud. You also have trouble if you're trying to cheat by using the extra small instances, the micro instances for EC2, because those only have 5 megabit internet connections. And those share cores, which is why they're so cheap. You don't even get the 1.6 gigahertz. So then something that's more Azure specific, but that still gave us a ton of trouble, is the way that the projects are set up. So I don't know how many people are very familiar with Visual Studio's project structure, but each project has a project definition file, which is an XML file listing all of the files in the project that need to be compiled, all of the dependencies, and any external tasks that you need to run. Cloud projects have their own project type, which is a CC proj. Something in there probably stands for cloud, I'm not really sure. There are configs, which is really nice actually because you can run multiple configs for a single project. The standard ones are local and cloud because there is an emulator that is really nice. And this is where you put all of your storage connection strings. So if you have different environments you're running in, for example, the storage emulator versus production, you just set up different configuration projects for it. When you're trying to integrate it into a full build system, that kind of gets in the way though. So the way deploying to Azure works is that you build everything, stick it all in a folder, run the cs pack command, and then it gives you this nice little package file that you can upload, which is great if you're living in Visual Studio and letting the IDE take care of everything. So while we do use Visual Studio, we don't exclusively use it. We have tools that let us build multiple projects simultaneously, and those needed to be modified for this, mostly by sticking a whole lot of in-place commands into the project files and making sure everything got into a single place. And so modifying our existing build structure for Azure took several weeks, and actually ended up putting the project a bit behind schedule. So lastly, we needed to test stuff in the cloud. Local testing is easy. Like I said, there's an emulator. You push run in Visual Studio. It runs. It brings up little command prompts for each instance that you're trying to run. You can debug. Great. Because Azure is managed services, remote testing isn't so easy. It doesn't understand the concept of a Delta update. You generate a package and you upload it, and then it brings down the VM, restarts it, brings it back up, and that takes 15 minutes. So that is a little bit more difficult. As I mentioned before, performance was a problem for us. Visual Studio has wonderful profiling tools. They supposedly also work in the cloud, but I haven't been able to get them working. Again, that's probably because we're not straight up using Visual Studio for everything. And one advantage that Azure has over, for example, Google App Engine is that you can remote into the VMs if you need to diagnose stuff. But you can also enable diagnostics, and then the event logs show up as an Azure table, which is really convenient. So some notes for testing. Make sure no one else is using the same storage account. As I mentioned, you can have multiple configuration files, but that means you're checking them in, and the storage account that you're using is in the configuration files. So if somebody is using a configuration file locally that stores stuff in the cloud, and you try using the same configuration file, your services are now competing with each other to grab the same resources. And if, for example, you're processing resources and then deleting them because you're doing something that does a lot of writes and isn't persistent data, that can be a problem. Don't trust the emulator. It is really good, but emulators are never 100%. Just a side note, not really related to Azure. This goes double for the Android emulator. That thing sucks. And also, you have to be careful when using the SDK. It hides a bunch of implementation details. For example, it may look like you're using a function to upload the blobs to storage, but you're actually sending them as parameters in an HTTP request. There are some characters that are not valid in HTTP requests, and if you try sending them, it will crash on you. And it will take you a while to figure out what's going on, because it gives you some weird error message like invalid control characters in report. So yeah, that's actually all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
What are you guys using for version control?
Microsoft grabbed a source license for Perforce and modified it like 20 years ago. So we're still using that. Yep.
So are there any plans for upsizing? You know, for instance, we run 60 SQL Server databases, and we'd love to have, a copy of those in the cloud. But I mean, converting those is
right.
Are there any plans for an upsizing wizard? I mean, you can go.
I'm not entirely sure. We actually are. Like I said, we're not migrating everything. So we managed to convince IT to let us open a connection between the on-premise databases and Azure, and we're just using that. There is probably a way to migrate your existing databases. I just don't know what it is because we haven't looked into it.
Yeah, because we're stuck with, we have to use a VM.
Yeah.
We'll just push everything there. And
right.
The thing is, then we don't have load balancing.
Yeah.
The whole key is to have that load balance.
Right.
So we're, on this precipice. Looking
Yeah.
over going.
I mean, as far as the future plans for Azure go, I'm on the same level as you are. There's probably some internal documents I could get a hold of, but they don't really give those out. So for example, I mentioned I was having trouble getting profiling working. I have a support ticket open with the public Azure support that I'm working through to try to get that working.
So if I open Visual Studio 12, does it come with the Azure add-on?
No, you still need to download that separately.
So were you guys the first people to make a connection between the normal prod network and Azure?
I don't think we were the first, but I think we were the first maybe in Windows Live.
Okay.
Ops goes down with to the team level. So safety platform, in addition to having the 4 dev teams, also has its own ops team and its own research team because we do a lot of machine learning stuff. So there was procedure in place for connecting to the prod network, but it took a lot of pestering for them to be able to set that up and get approval for it from the guys managing the prod network and so on. Yeah.
Also, so like, it's not related to Azure, but did you guys like roll your own email service? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Or is it just a service that just sends the emails to something?
It is a service to generate the emails and
Oh,
send them out. So we've got to send the welcome email and the you've changed your settings email that you really need to do this, and we send out weekly reports.
Yeah, because I was gonna say it's actually sending email like.
Oh no, we
well,
didn't
it's not
write our
easy.
own SMTP server.
Yeah.
The reason I mention that though is that unlike a website which is getting consistent traffic over the week, we are sending out weekly reports. So it's just at 6 a.m. on Sunday or whatever. Here's a million emails you need to send. So it's not an evenly distributed load. Anyway, yeah.
What are you guys using for virus control? I mean, we use Kaspersky, and the thing is, a company out of Moscow. I don't understand.
Microsoft has its own AV.
Oh, yeah.
It was an acquisition a few years ago. Forefront, I think.
You know, for a U.S. company to use, software from a hostile government, this is,
Right.
I mean, I told them, they're like, oh, no, there's no problem. But it seems to be widespread.
Yeah,
Kaspersky.
no, Microsoft has, Microsoft Security Essentials is the consumer version, and I think Forefront is the commercial variation on that.
This is going bad, but my junk folder in my Microsoft Windows Live email, I love it because I signed up for CodeMash, the Google group, and all the messages go into the junk folder, so I don't have to, I just check the junk folder once in a while, there's 100 of them a day, and of course I didn't get a ticket to CodeMash, but I could see everybody's gripes in there. But I was wondering, I thought once I checked, an email, and it would be validated. In other words, it would show up in my inbox. It doesn't until I move it.
Yeah. Some people like to look for their junk even if it is junk. Also, Microsoft still takes privacy seriously. So our filters are taking into effect when you hit the junk or not junk button, but it does not take into effect when you read an email.
And are there plans to get rid of Access? Because I don't see a database, in Office 365, or in.
I think it's
Is
still
it
there
open,
in 2013.
is it Open Office, they call it?
It's still there in 2013, I think. I don't remember if I installed it.
But I see this thing OneNote, and I don't know what it.
OneNote. OneNote is a really useful program that. Let's see. Oh, I guess I didn't. Right, I didn't install it for 2013. OneNote is a note-taking program, so it's used a lot in schools, and it's used a lot at Microsoft where people use it for taking meeting notes. But it's not a replacement for Access. But I don't actually know most of Office's plans, because that is Office. I'm in the Windows division, so even though we send the spam filter to Exchange and Outlook, the lowest person in common in the org chart is Steve Ballmer. So we don't get included in any of their memos.
But this idea of consistency and upsizing. I mean,
Yeah.
you really have to, you have this, like us, business users out there.
Right.
We would like to push our stuff in the cloud, even our access databases. Just hit upsize, because you can go from access to SQL Server very easily.
Yeah, the problem with Access is that it doesn't allow concurrent use, which I don't think makes it a strong candidate. You can save it into SkyDrive. I don't know if 2013 has full support for it. This presentation actually is not saved on my computer at all. It's saved in my SkyDrive Pro account through Office 365, and I just opened it locally. And whenever it supports multiple authoring, you can see I still have it open on my work computer because I closed it before I left for the night.
Will you post it? Will you post it?
Yeah.
So what's your next, what's the next thing you're gonna move, do you think?
The website. We actually looked into moving that now, but with only 5 developers, we didn't have the resources. So I think we're going to start working on that in 2 or 3 weeks. Anything else? Yep.
What makes Azure distinctive from like Amazon's EC2 and some of the gamut of services they offer?
So it's mostly just a focus area. Amazon's primary focus on developing EC2 is in the infrastructure as a service, where you grab a VM and do whatever you want on that, while Azure's primary focus is on the platform, where you deal with the managed systems, and the deployment is set up so that it's really easy to deploy without ever taking anything down. Like by default, when you deploy, it takes down one machine at a time and spins up new ones, which takes even longer, but it means no downtime. And you know, it's not considered an add-on to have the load balancing. It's considered a primary feature of the service.
Yeah.
Also, I think the VMs, when you're using the platform services, are cheaper.
But you did say there was just a blank VM option with
Yeah.
Azure also, yeah.
Harley?
So one of the things with EC2 that you always hear about is having to set up your availability zones correctly for dealing with, say, Virginia going down. How does Azure handle that? Do you have to do the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. You set up which zone the specific instance is in.
Okay.
I mean, I can show you the portal because, well, like I said, we're using the public portals. So this is the dev subscription we have set up. It's not actually going to be used in prod, but it's just for the devs on the team to play around with. You can see that we set up all of our servers in South Central.
Why do you use Mozilla? Why do you use Mozilla?
Good.
Oh, Firefox.
Because there's still some stuff that doesn't work great in IE. Also the add-ons, mostly the add-ons. Yeah.
So you said every time you deploy, it reboots the whole VM?
Yeah.
Oh, crap.
Well, that's for redeployment. For the websites, you can do an incremental update.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point in a service like this is to ensure zero downtime. So in order to do that, you have to take the node that you're updating offline, wait for it to update, and then bring it back up.
Well, yeah, that's fine, but like, you mean actually reboot Windows?
Yes.
Okay. Instead of just like restarting IAS or whatever.
Right. It really wants to make sure that it's working cleanly.
Super consistent.
You're never going to run into any weird bugs if you start the computer up each time instead of just trying to bring it down. Yeah.
What kind of problems do you run into, or do you run into any problems if you deploy and people access your service while you're deploying? Like, do some people get redirected to the new one and some people get redirected to the old one?
Yeah.
Okay. And the load balancing makes sure that enough computers are up at any time to
Yeah.
handle the current demand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it forces enough computers to be up to match the current demand, because the system does not by default spin up VMs for you. It just does the load balancing, and it'll alert you, I believe, if you start going over capacity. All it does is it'll just bring one machine down at a time.
Okay.
Yep.
Conceptually, I can see what I have to do to go to SQL Server in the cloud. But what about my web development? My shop right now is moving from ASP to MVC4,
Yeah.
the web API. So
Oh, that's identical.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is actually running in IIS just on the remote server. So you make the ASP project, add it as a web role in the cloud project. The cloud project doesn't actually have any code in it. It just has a list of web roles and worker roles. The web roles are just standard IIS projects, and the worker roles are libraries with a class that is a subclass of worker role, and it just loads those up. And you can include any libraries you want. The email service, for example, is using Razor, ASP's templating engine, to generate the emails. Yep.
So I'm not sure if I understood this properly, but so if at 3 a.m. You've got your little website up on Azure, and it suddenly goes viral,
Yeah.
what happens to your website? Will it?
It
this
will still go
automatically-
down if it's 3 a.m. unless you've set up your own system to monitor it and spin up VMs.
Okay.
It hasn't gotten that smart yet, and I'm not sure if everybody wants it to, because that would cost you money. Even if it's needed, it's nice to ask before charging people.
It's like, how do you take metrics and actually determine that you're being hit? Because different websites have different performance profiles, so it's hard.
Yeah.
Do they work you to death?
No,
How many hours you work per day? Or does that vary?
7 to 8. Sometimes I'll do more if we're, for example, approaching a deadline and I'm behind. And I did have to go in 1 or 2 Saturdays just to clean stuff up. But I'm usually in at 10 to 10:30 and out 6 to 6:30. Yep.
Does Azure have anything like a data aggregation like Hadoop, or like?
I believe they have a Hadoop package for Azure.
Okay.
Microsoft has a separate service that was developed independently that we use internally, so I looked into it.
So it's like that what you use for all of your like reports and
For these reports, no. For the processing the million emails and generating machine learning on the spam filter, yes. For processing all of the Microsoft account login data from the use reports, we use Cosmos. Anything else?
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Okay.
Thank you.